Welcome to the Empathy Stories channel, where we bring you heartwarming tales of resilience, love, and the miracles life can offer. In today's story, we follow Rachel and John, a couple navigating the impossible when an unexpected pregnancy turns their world upside down. Join us as we explore their emotional journey and the power of believing in miracles. The soft light of dawn crept through the curtains, bathing Rachel's small, cluttered room in warmth. Rachel Adams, a 28-year-old maid working in a sprawling mansion in the outskirts of a city far from the comfort of her own home, stared at the ceiling, deep in thought. Her life had always been about providing for herself, and occasionally caring for the wealthy family she worked for, the Mitchells. But lately, the comfort of her predictable days had been overshadowed by a secret she hadn't shared with anyone. The test results sat beside her on the nightstand, clear as day. It had all been a blur at first. Rachel hadn't really believed the small pink plus sign when she first saw it. After all, she knew it was supposed to be impossible. John Mitchell, the man she had worked for these past 5 years, was infertile. He had been upfront about it the moment they had begun spending more time together, building a friendship that, over time, blossomed into something deeper. Their connection had always been something special, but it was a bond built on mutual respect and the understanding of boundaries. John had treated Rachel as more than just a maid. He had seen her as a person, a partner in many ways. But their relationship, though intimate and filled with trust, had never gone beyond that until now. Rachel had never expected this to happen. It was unthinkable. And yet, here she was, holding a secret she had no idea how to face. John's infertility had always kept them at a distance from certain dreams, the dream of a family, the dream of raising children together. They had talked about it once, early on, as they stood in the garden, looking out over the sprawling estate. It was a fleeting conversation, one that never really had to go any further because they both knew the truth: children weren't in their future. But now, Rachel had to face the fact that she was pregnant, and she was certain the child was John's. The timing lined up perfectly. And yet, how could she explain this miracle? Could she even explain it? Her mind raced with fear as she sat on the edge of the bed, holding the test results in her hands. She had to tell him. But how? The uncertainty of the situation weighed heavily on her shoulders. It wasn't just about the pregnancy, it was about everything that had been built between them. This revelation threatened the fragile structure of their lives. Rachel sat for hours in the silence, wondering how she would even begin to approach him. They had shared so much emotions, deep conversations, and so many unspoken understandings, but this was uncharted territory. When she did finally step into John's office, her hands shook uncontrollably, and her stomach twisted into knots. She knocked softly before stepping inside. And John, always the gentleman, stood from behind his desk. His face softened when he saw her, his eyes taking in the way her shoulders were hunched, the way her gaze wouldn't quite meet his. "Rachel, is everything okay?" John asked, concern coloring his voice. The room felt suffocating, and Rachel fought to keep herself steady. "John, I need to tell you something," she began, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I'm pregnant." John's face went pale. His reaction was instantaneous, but it wasn't the one Rachel had expected. Instead of the shock, confusion, or anger that she anticipated, there was only silence. A long silence that seemed to stretch for eternity. Both of them trapped in a moment where words failed them. "But how? You're infertile," Rachel managed to say, her voice breaking as she faced him. the weight of the truth hitting her harder than she ever imagined. "I don't know how." "Rachel." John replied softly, his voice thick with disbelief. This can't be happening." They both stood there in the stillness, trying to make sense of a situation neither of them could explain. John's mind raced, his thoughts in a swirl of confusion. He had accepted that he would never have children. It was a decision made long ago, one that he had come to terms with. But this was beyond comprehension. Rachel, on the other hand, was overwhelmed by the realization that she was about to face a world of unknowns. She had no idea what this meant for her or John, whether their bond could survive the weight of this discovery, whether she could keep this child or if she would be forced to walk this path alone. As the silence lingered, John's shock faded, and something else took its place. A quiet resolve, a tenderness that surprised both of them. He stepped closer, reaching out as if to reassure her. But Rachel stepped back, unsure of what this moment meant for them. "I don't know how this is possible," John said, finally breaking the silence. "But if you'll have me, I'll be here for you. For the baby. You're not in this alone." Rachel. Her eyes welled up with tears. She hadn't expected him to say that. Hadn't expected him to offer the support she so desperately needed. But it wasn't just the support she needed, it was the reassurance that this wasn't the end of their story. It was the beginning of something else. Something neither of them could yet understand. But something they would face together. And so, in that quiet office, under the weight of unspoken truths, Rachel found the courage to believe in the impossible. This pregnancy, this child, this miracle, it had brought them closer together. And for the first time in a long time, Rachel allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, everything would be okay. The weeks that followed were a blur of emotions for Rachel and John. The uncertainty surrounding the pregnancy weighed heavily on both of them. But neither could shake the unspoken bond they had formed in the wake of the revelation. John, once the picture of controlled success, found himself facing a reality he had never anticipated. The man who had built a multi-billion-dollar empire now had to confront the fragility of life itself. And Rachel, caught between the joy of the unexpected and the terror of the unknown, felt herself torn between fear and hope. John had always been someone who approached life with logic and planning. But now, with the knowledge that he would soon be a father, his carefully curated world began to feel fragile. Like it could all shatter in an instant. They hadn't spoken much about the pregnancy since that fateful day when Rachel had shared the news. John had promised to support her. But the gravity of it all settled between them like an invisible wall, making each moment feel like they were walking on a tightrope. Rachel, too, was struggling. Her emotions were a swirl of excitement and fear. Her body a constant reminder of the change she couldn't quite control. She had no idea how she would navigate the coming months. She had no family to turn to. No one to help her. Her life had been spent working long hours for the Mitchell family, never expecting to find herself in such an unexpected and life-altering situation. One evening, as Rachel sat in her small apartment, staring out at the city skyline, she thought about what she had always wanted: stability, love, and the chance to raise a family. But now, with John's infertility looming over them, she was left with a feeling of unknowing. What if this child wasn't meant to be? What if she was destined to raise a child alone? She was so lost in thought that she didn't notice John walk into the room until he cleared his throat softly, startling her from her reverie. "I've been thinking," John began, his voice hesitant, "about the baby. About what this means for us, for you." Rachel turned to face him, her heart heavy with the question she couldn't answer. "What do you mean?" she asked. trying to mask the tremor in her voice. John hesitated, then slowly made his way to the couch, sitting beside her. He didn't reach for her hand, but the space between them was charged with something that neither could ignore. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know how to be a father. Rachel. I've never imagined it, especially with everything that's happened. But if this child is real, if it's really mine, his voice trailed off as though the words were too heavy for him to finish. Rachel swallowed hard, her throat tight with emotion. She had never seen John so vulnerable before, so unsure. She knew he was struggling with the same question she had. But hearing him say it aloud made the situation feel even more daunting. John, she began softly. I don't know how this happened. I don't know how we're here. But we are. And we'll figure it out. Together. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of their unspoken fears filled the room, hanging heavily between them. But there was something in Rachel's words, something in the quiet certainty of her tone, that seemed to ground them both. This was real. And despite the uncertainty, they were going to face it together. In the days that followed, John's attempts to keep a sense of control began to slip. He tried to continue his daily routines, board meetings, conference calls, decisions that affected thousands of people, but his thoughts kept drifting back to Rachel, to the baby. The uncertainty gnawed at him. Was this his child? How could it be? But he didn't dare voice the questions out loud. Every time he looked at Rachel, her quiet strength reassured him. She was stronger than anyone he knew. And that made him believe, even when doubt crept in, that they could make this work. Rachel, too, struggled. Her pregnancy, though still early, had already started to show in the way her body changed. She tried to keep up with the work at the mansion, though her fatigue weighed her down. Still, she couldn't shake the sense of isolation that often consumed her. She had always been independent, relying on no one but herself. Now, she found herself depending on John, on a man who had built walls around his heart, walls that were slowly beginning to crumble as he confronted a future he never thought he would have. One evening, as they sat in silence, Rachel felt a shift in the air. It was as if something had clicked between them, something deeper than words. She turned to John, her heart heavy with the weight of everything they had been avoiding. John, she said softly, I'm scared. But I believe in this. In us. I believe we can do this. John looked at her, his expression softening. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to hope. I'm scared too, he admitted. But if you're with me, if we're in this together, I'll support you. I'll be here. I promise. Rachel nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. She had no idea what the future held. But in that moment, she knew that with John by her side, they could face anything. The uncertainty still lingered. But together, they were ready to take the next step. And so, as they faced the unknown, their journey took its first step toward the unimaginable, a child, a miracle, and a future they could build together. As the weeks passed, Rachel and John found themselves navigating a path they had never anticipated. Their conversations became less about the uncertainties and more about the future they were starting to imagine. The pregnancy, which had initially seemed like a whirlwind of doubts and confusion, began to take shape as a shared dream, something they both now held onto tightly. Despite the difficulties they faced in understanding the intricacies of what was happening, something extraordinary was unfolding in their lives. Rachel's body continued to change. And with each passing day, the reality of their impending parenthood became undeniable. She could feel the life growing inside her, kicking and moving in ways that made her both nervous and excited. There were moments when the fear would creep in, especially late at night when she would lie awake, wondering if everything was truly as it seemed. But as time went on, she began to feel a stronger sense of peace, a sense that she wasn't alone in this. John was there, supporting her every step of the way, in ways she hadn't expected. He was there at every doctor's appointment, holding her hand when she felt the weight of the unknown. One evening, after a long day at the office, John came home with a small, unexpected surprise: a baby book. It wasn't much, just a simple journal for expectant parents to document their journey. But it was a symbol of something important. He had begun to embrace the idea of fatherhood, of building a future with Rachel, and of taking his place in the child's life. Despite everything that had once seemed impossible, "I thought we could start looking at baby names," John said quietly, his voice filled with a gentle excitement. Rachel had never seen him so vulnerable, so open to the idea of being a father. He had always been the strong, silent type, focused on business and success. But now he was standing in front of her, holding out something that signified his commitment to the family they were about to become. Rachel smiled softly, her heart swelling with emotion. "I've been thinking about that too," she admitted. "I think it's time we make this real, John. Time to start believing in this miracle we've been given." Over the next few weeks, they began to plan in earnest. They set up a nursery, filled it with soft colors and gentle fabrics, a space that felt welcoming and peaceful. They spent nights talking about their hopes for their child, about what kind of parents they wanted to be, and how they would handle the challenges that lay ahead. Every conversation was filled with warmth, with love, and with the promise of a future they were slowly beginning to believe in. The miracle of the pregnancy still hung in the air like something precious and fragile. Neither Rachel nor John could explain how it had happened. They couldn't offer any scientific reason for why this child, in spite of the medical impossibilities, was growing inside Rachel. But that uncertainty no longer mattered. What mattered was the child that was coming into their lives. A child that would bring them closer together in ways they never expected. And then, one day, the unimaginable happened. The DNA test, which they had done for peace of mind, arrived at their doorstep. John opened the envelope with nervous hands, his heart racing in his chest. Rachel stood beside him, her eyes wide with anticipation. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. As John read the results, a smile slowly spread across his face, the weight of disbelief lifting from his shoulders. The results confirmed what they had never dared to believe: this was his child. Rachel gasped in disbelief, her hand flying to her mouth as the tears welled up in her eyes. "John, this is real," she whispered, her voice filled with awe. John nodded, his eyes glistening with emotion. "It's a miracle, Rachel. A real miracle." In that moment, all the uncertainty, all the fear, melted away. They had been given the gift of life, against all odds. And that gift was now a reality. The doubts that had once loomed over them like an insurmountable mountain had been replaced with the beauty of their future. Rachel, who had once felt the weight of the world on her shoulders, now felt lighter, freer, knowing that she and John had made it through the darkest moments of their lives together. As the days ticked down to the arrival of their daughter, John and Rachel grew closer. The final stretch of Rachel's pregnancy was filled with anticipation, excitement, and an undeniable bond between the couple. They no longer feared the unknown, because they had learned to embrace it, knowing that life no matter how uncertain. Always had a way of surprising them when they least expected it. And then, one early morning, as the sun began to rise, their daughter arrived. The delivery was challenging, but the moment Rachel held her baby girl for the first time, everything else fell away. The world outside, with all its complexities and questions, seemed distant. There was only the quiet, the warmth of their daughter's tiny body, and the overwhelming love that swelled in their hearts. In that moment, all of Rachel's fears and doubts evaporated. She looked at John, who was standing beside her, tears streaming down his face as he held their daughter in his arms. It was as if the universe had conspired to give them this miracle, this moment of pure joy that would forever change their lives. "We did it, Rachel," John whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "We made it through." Rachel smiled through her tears, her heart full. "Yes, we did." And in that moment, they both knew this was the beginning of something new, something beautiful. Their journey, which had begun with so much uncertainty, had led them to this perfect moment, this perfect miracle. And with it came the knowledge that sometimes the greatest gifts in life come when you least expect them. Thank you for watching this touching story on the Empathy Stories channel. Rachel and John's journey reminds us that even in the face of uncertainty, love and hope can lead to the most miraculous transformations. If this story moved you, please like, comment, and subscribe for more inspiring tales of human connection and resilience.